Waiting for Mike to join us. Mike Navarre, former chief of police in the city of Toledo, current chief of police in, there we go. All right. Hey, there he is. You look good, Chief.
You too, Fred.
How many of these things have you done already?
Well, I'm getting used to it. Initially, it was odd, but
Yeah.
Zoom are the new norm. So
Yeah, I hope it
probably.
I hope it doesn't stay that way. I'd rather have people in studio with me. You know, it works out so much better that way.
I agree with that.
All right. Well, I'm recording this, so we'll have both the audio and the video. We'll be using it on air and also on social media. So can you hear me just fine? You hear me well enough?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And I've got you. It sounds pretty good. You're just using the microphone on your laptop or your computer there?
Yes.
All right, excellent. That sounds pretty decent then. I think we'll be all set. All right, we're just going to cover everything as much as we can. How much time do you have?
I have as much as you need. I've got at least an hour.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll see what we can get done in about half an hour to 40 minutes then, okay?
Perfect.
All right, excellent. I'm speaking with Police Chief Mike Navarre, Oregon, Ohio, former police chief in Toledo, Ohio, and a current candidate for the Lucas County Sheriff's Office. He's one of 3 people running for that office. He'll be on the ballot on November the 3rd against Brett Warner and Earl Mack. Chief, thanks a lot for the time this morning. I appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now you're in Oregon now. It's a little bit quieter than Toledo, maybe. I think most people would probably agree with that. Is that how you found it when you went over there when you first transferred over there?
It's a lot quieter.
And you want to keep it that way, right?
Oregon has a lot going for it. It's a very fine community, very supportive of their police department, and there is very little crime. And the crimes that we do have, we have enough resources. Generally, we can solve them.
Yeah. Let's talk about the resources for a little bit, because there is a movement, and I'm sure it'll get there before too long. It's nationwide, and here in Toledo, it's taking foot to either defund or / now they're calling it refund police departments across the nation. Where do you stand on that kind of stuff? And is that something you could even really afford to do to either defund or refund your office?
Well, I think Governor DeWine said it best when he was asked that question a while ago, and he says it's nonsense. And I guess you have to define what defund means. Mm-hmm. If you're going to take away money from police departments and expect them to continue to perform the same level of service, it just doesn't work. Something's got to give. You either lose in the quality of officers that you hire if you're going to be paying them less, or you lose out on the amount of training that is needed to do the job, or the equipment. If you're talking about devoting more resources to education for children, for treating drug addiction, mental illness, that's a great idea. Find the money to do that, but don't take the money away from the police. So I guess it depends on who you ask is what their definition of defund really means.
Yeah. Was the situation in Toledo where the budget was much bigger, the force was much bigger, was that any different maybe from what you're facing in Oregon? Because the contention from a lot of people is we're spending an awful lot of money on militarizing the police force. And for a while we had an urban assault vehicle, I guess you would call it. Do you see much of that going on across the country, or is that something that you might consider defunding or refunding?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with perception. Police departments are paramilitary organizations. Mm-hmm. They need the best equipment. They need the best weapons because the criminals that they're confronting have good weapons. it really, if you go back to the, I think it was back in the 70s when the FBI agents encountered the automatic weapons at a bank robbery down in Miami, Florida,
Hmm.
were outgunned, and they lost several agents that day. And there's been a trend ever since then to make sure that police officers have the best weapons. That that armored vehicle came in handy once here in Oregon. We actually borrowed it from Toledo because
Oh,
we had a barricaded man in a garage who was shooting into his neighbors' houses. And the best way to get him out of that garage was to use that vehicle to take down the garage door, and nobody gets hurt.
right.
So to have those resources available, you don't need to flaunt them. You don't need to make it look like you're a military operation, but I'm for making sure that our officers have the best equipment available because we need to keep them safe because they're out there keeping our residents safe.
So would you say meet the level of force that you're met with an equal level of force then?
Well, you have to. I mean, officers have an extremely difficult job. There are things happening right now in this country that are just insane. What happened in LA a few nights ago where somebody walked up to two deputies sitting in a car
Yeah.
and just shot point blank, that has been happening way too often. And we have to make sure that our officers have the best equipment.
When something like that happens, I'm sure it gives you pause and your officers pause. Do you speak to them as a group to try and reassure them, to let them know that, look, we're prepared for this? Not that it won't happen, because obviously nobody in the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department thought it would happen either. But is there a meeting, a group meeting with officers to reassure them that we're going to be okay?
Well, I do go to roll call on occasion, and we talk about topics such as that. But more importantly, I have regular staff meetings with my supervisors, and I really need them to get that message to their officers because they're meeting with them every day at the beginning of the shift and numerous times throughout the shift. And it's a very difficult time to be a police officer in this country right now. And I don't see it getting.
It really is, and I'm wondering. Well, let's go back to when you started. What made you decide to become a police officer in the first place? And do you think that that would hold true in today's world?
Well, my father was a police officer for 33 years. He had an exciting job. He was a homicide detective.
Okay.
That's the only thing I ever remember him doing is investigating homicides. And he was elevated to the rank of captain where he supervised the detectives. And I thought it was an incredibly interesting job, something that certainly I was interested in. My brother and I both joined the police department in the same academy class. And I went on, I never had that college experience where you would go away to college. I started working full-time right out of high school.
Yeah.
Started taking night classes at the University of Toledo and took some criminal justice classes, talked to some police officers, and became even more interested. And the first opportunity that I had when I reached the age of 21 to take the test, I took it. And it was a civil service test, and you have to score high enough to be selected, and I was very fortunate to do so.
How many years did you serve here in Toledo before you went over to Oregon?
I was in Toledo for 34 years.
34 years. And you left as chief of police, right?
Yes, I was the chief for the last 13 years of my career in Toledo.
While you were chief, how would you describe your management style? Earlier, you said that you let your supervisors, you pass the word on to your supervisors because they have regular contact with the officers. Does that work in a city the size of Toledo also?
Well, in Toledo, you have a much larger staff than I have here in the city of Oregon. And you have a lot of top management. I had 4 deputy chiefs. I had 10 captains. And you have to delegate those responsibilities. And your job is to just make sure everyone's on the same page. My management style was, I didn't try to move too quickly. When there was a difficult decision that had to be made, I tried to seek as much input as I could. I met regularly with the union presidents because they were the voice of the rank and file.
Yeah.
and they needed to know where I was coming from. And when we had disagreements, we had to get to the point where we could agree to disagree if it came to that. And we needed, accurate information passed on to the troops. So,
Yeah.
but I thought that relationship was very good with the union presidents. I worked a lot with the late D. Michael Collins when he was the president of the OPPA. And we almost always came to an agreement and worked out our differences on grievance settlements and on disciplinary measures, and rarely had to go to arbitration.
Do you see that situation being the same in the sheriff's office? Do we have the same kind of hierarchy over there as we would in the police department?
I don't know a lot about the sheriff's office to give a very educated response to that question. I know enough about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a department of close to 500 people, or maybe slightly over 500. So there is a hierarchy, and there are top administrators that you have to rely on. There are a lot of similarities. The bulk of the sheriff's office is running a jail, and not so much road patrol. At least that's the way it is in Lucas County. Some counties are different.
Yeah.
Wood counties have such a large road patrol staff. So you really have to rely on your experts in corrections to run that jail properly. And that, to me, will be one of the greatest challenges if I'm elected sheriff.
Yeah, the jail is always the first question that comes up for anybody who's running for office when it comes to sheriff. Do you have thoughts on where it should go, how it should be maintained, how it should be staffed? All of the questions are going to come up during the campaign about the jail.
Well, whoever is elected sheriff, their number one priority should be to begin the planning process for a new jail.
Mm-hmm.
It has to go downtown. I think the residents have spoken very loudly. Trying to put it into a neighborhood was a huge mistake. It needs to be downtown because of the dynamics of a jail. There are people that go in and out of a jail 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah. It's not like a prison. It doesn't work in a neighborhood where a prison might work in a neighborhood, as it does in North Toledo. So it needs to be downtown or very close to downtown for a lot of reasons. They have to determine the proper size. There was talk about making it a post-conviction facility in addition to a pretrial facility. Right. That's what it is right now. It's just pretrial. So you have to determine how many inmates that are going to be housed at any given time in that jail. And then you have to identify a funding source. And it's not going to be a tax levy, because I don't think voters are going to vote in a tax levy.
No.
Build a jail. That's just not going to happen. And the new sheriff is going to have to begin that process immediately. And because it's going to take some time. It may take a good 3-4 years to get that jail built to where they can move in. But
so where do you start in that process? What's your first step in working toward that? Let's assume, yeah, the new jail needs to be built, can't be renovated. We need a new one. We've kind of figured out, we'll put it downtown. How do you get that started? What's your first step as a sheriff?
Well, you have to answer those 3 questions. And I think the location question is being worked on right now by the county commissioners and the county administrators. Mm-hmm. I've had conversations with both of them, and there are possible sites that have been identified. I don't think they're at the point where they want to make that public.
Right.
And I think they have to determine the size. It's not going to be a horizontal jail because you don't have enough land downtown to build a horizontal jail. It's going to have to be a vertical jail.
Okay.
If they do that in every major city in the country, there's no reason why they can't do it here in Toledo, Ohio. And they have to talk about a funding source. And there was a study done back in, it's been a while. It's been at least, I think, 12 years ago, where they looked at building a new jail and how modern technology will be able to operate a new jail with less personnel cost.
Okay.
So you're going to have to take those personnel savings and use that to fund the purchase, unless there's a hidden treasure of money out there in Lucas County that nobody is aware of.
No, not that I'm aware of, that's for sure. I don't think so, not yet.
Tax levy is not the answer. I don't see voters approving that. I wouldn't
Mhm.
even feel comfortable going to the voters and asking them for money to build
Yeah.
a new jail.
Now, you mentioned that in Lucas County, different maybe than the other 87 other counties in Ohio, is more of a jail situation. Other counties are more of a road patrol situation, like Wood County, and probably most of the rural areas, I would expect. But there are
Yes.
other things that the sheriff's office does, including the DARP program, which seems to have been pretty successful. I've talked to a number of people who have been through it. It seems to have worked. Is that something that you would consider keeping at this point, based on what your knowledge of it is?
Well, I think you have to keep it unless you can find something that's better.
Yeah.
And I don't know of anything better out there right now. I spend a lot of time. I've had a lot of conversations with Sheriff Tharp. Last week, he invited me to a meeting with some of the DART board members. I think it's been very successful. It's got national recognition. It needs to be enhanced. You need greater participation from other police agencies across Lucas County, because the Lucas County Sheriff's Office can't do it all on their own. What they've
Right.
done is phenomenal. And I think you have to embrace that and try to enhance it.
Does being a former chief of Toledo Police and current chief of the Oregon Force, does that give you a leg up or an advantage maybe in working more closely with the other agencies? Because as the Lucas County Sheriff, if you want to expand DART, you would have to work with all the other agencies that work in Lucas County. How would you go about doing that?
Well, I spend a lot of time with those chiefs. We meet regularly on different issues. 911, we have a organization where we meet every other month. Being the chief of the largest city in Lucas County and a medium-sized suburb like Oregon, I think gives me a real advantage, because I can offer both perspectives. There were things that I learned being the chief of a suburb that I just never would have had that knowledge being the chief in Toledo.
Yeah.
And all of the suburban chiefs that were there when I was in Toledo are no longer there. They've all been retired. So it's a new group, and it's a good group. We are very blessed to have the chiefs that we do in Lucas County, and they're very open-minded, and they're looking for ways to work together and to make this county safer.
What other collaborations can you point to, maybe either as a Toledo Police Chief or Chief of the Oregon Force, have you been able to work with to get things done in either of those cities? What other groups?
Well, we started in Toledo, we started the crisis intervention training, which is the CIT training.
Mm-hmm.
We borrowed that idea or stole that idea from Memphis, Tennessee. It's been very successful. It is expanded across the country. We were the first ones in Northwest Ohio. We weren't the first ones in Ohio, Cincinnati was. And all of the other suburban agencies have embraced that. So we train together. We train together oftentimes with our SWAT operations.
Okay.
Toledo has much more experience than the suburbs, and they have a lot to offer. So we train because there will be times when we'll need Toledo to come help us. We may call Maumee or Sylvania to come help us. So it's important. I think the largest collaboration is probably what has happened in the last couple of years with 911 consolidation.
Yeah.
I was a supporter of that. I took a lot of heat for being a supporter of that, but I've been to several centers across the country going back to the mid-90s when I was just a deputy chief. They sent me to Monroe County, which is in Rochester, New York, to look at a consolidated center. And I became a believer then. I've been to Dallas, I've been to Indianapolis, I've been to Louisville. This is the absolute right thing to do, and it took a lot of collaboration. And I give a lot of kudos to folks at Lucas County like Matt Hireman, who put this thing together. And it took a lot of work, and it's going to be a better system, and we're all going to be safer because of it. And on top of that, we're going to save millions of dollars annually, which is always a great thing because we can use that money for greater purposes.
Yeah, and you did take a lot of heat for that. We heard a lot of blowback on the radio show from people who don't like that idea and are worried that it's actually going to extend into rescue services and the fire department over in the city of Oregon. Have you heard any talk of that at all, or is it just going to stay a 911 deal?
Well, I don't want to speak for the Oregon Fire Chief or the Oregon City Administrator, and I know there are issues that you deal with in any community that has a volunteer fire department, part-timers working with full-timers. And
Mhm.
Oregon kind of fits in that in between, where we're too big to have all part-timers and we're
Yeah.
too small to have all full-timers. So there are challenges that they're trying to work out, but 911 consolidation for communication purposes didn't have anything to do with fire service.
Okay.
So,
You mentioned in your last answer a little bit about the training. And let's talk about that a little bit because one of the things that a lot of people have complained about when they see police officers maybe acting poorly, let's say, is that it's the training that is causing them to do that. How important is training, and what should we look at when it comes to training our officers going forward from today?
well, training is critical, but when you look at examples of poor police behavior, sometimes it goes back to hiring. There are
Hmm.
people that are hired to be police officers that are just not cut out for this job. And that's a fact. That doesn't make them bad people. This is a
Right.
tough job, not for everybody. But once you hire them, in Ohio has a great basic training. It's very exhaustive. It covers a lot of different topics and physical conditioning, self-defense, firearms training, but that has to continue. And that's been a fight that I have been taking on at the state level for probably the past dozen years because Ohio does not mandate a minimum number of hours of in-service training for police officers except for firearms qualification. And that's basically a couple hours.
Yeah.
And states, Kentucky to our south, mandate 40 hours annually. The good departments, the progressive departments will do it anyway. Toledo has done it. Oregon does it. Most of our suburban agencies do it. But it should be a mandate across the state because you're never going to run out of viable topics to train police officers in. And there's just too many. And some you can only get to every 3 or 4 years.
Right. The other part of that is the mental health aspect of it, of officers who, for the most part, and especially in the bigger cities, are seeing people at their worst and dealing with some of the worst parts. You know, people being injured, people being shot, stabbed, whatever, people being arrested for things. What is the mental health situation, and what kind of mental health help should officers be getting? Should that be happening on a regular basis?
Well, again, good progressive police departments have a program in place and make that available to their officers. And we do that in Oregon. We contract with a outside provider to provide employee assistance
Hmm.
to our officers and their families. And we have to go to great lengths to make sure that that assistance rendering is kept confidential. Because if it's not, then the program loses its credibility.
Yeah.
And Toledo has done the same, and that's very important. And we do a lot of debriefing with our officers after a critical incident. We don't have a lot of shootings in Oregon. We have very few, but we do have a lot of traffic accidents. And we had a child killed on a bicycle not too long ago. And it was very tough for the officers. So that required some debriefing and also required some counseling from employee assistance providers. And
Hmm.
you really have to look at that very carefully because the suicide rate among police officers is a little bit higher than the general population, and
Yeah.
that's something that to be concerned about.
Now, you mentioned that you don't have a lot of shootings or officer involved shootings. You did have one a few months ago that got kicked kind of upstairs to BCI. Has that been adjudicated yet? We haven't really heard anything about it since then. Have you received any word from the state on how that's being worked out?
Well, I know the investigation has been completed by BCI.
Mm-hmm.
I was informed of that, and it's been turned over to a special prosecutor who was appointed by the Attorney General. That was at the request of Julia Bates. She
Okay.
refused her. And I talked to that special prosecutor last week, and he indicated to me that he hopes to have everything done and presented to a grand jury prior to the end of this month. So that would probably be what, another 2 weeks?
Yeah.
End of
So
the month.
in a case like that, it sounds like you're kept in the loop, but you don't really have any, I would say, input to it, do you? Do they just inform you that here's what's going on?
Well, I am kept in the loop, but we have to separate any administrative investigation that we do internally, which
Mm-hmm.
we have done, and this will be presented to our Firearms Review Board. We have to separate that from the criminal investigation.
Okay.
There can't be any communications, otherwise it would taint the criminal investigation. So we can't discuss our findings with them, and they take a separate path. And they look at criminal violation. We look at violations of our rules and regulations.
Of your policies. So are you even allowed to say then, I guess you couldn't even report on it because then the word would be out. Are you even allowed to say what your final adjudication of it is when it comes to your policy?
Now, we intend to release all that information on the same day, and I hope that'll be next week.
Okay, so we would find out at some point there. Are there things in the sheriff's department since you decided to run for it? Well, why did you decide to run for sheriff? You've been a cop for over 30 years now, and I would imagine that at some point you could retire here very soon. I know your kids are probably a little bit older, like mine are. I think we had one that was in the same school for a while, so you're going to end up being an empty nester here at some point. Why did you decide to take on this new role?
Well, I'm not ready to stop working. They always tell you that you'll know when it's time.
Yeah.
You're still working.
Yeah.
You'll know. I still enjoy going to work. If I get to the point where I don't enjoy going to work, then I simply won't. I like challenges. I think the Lucas County Sheriff's Office would be a tremendous challenge. Building a new jail would be a part of that challenge. Continuing the fight against opioid addiction would be a challenge, and looking at a new organization. It was a difficult decision. As you know, I didn't get in the race right away.
Yeah.
When I came to Oregon was supposed to be my last job. And here I've been here 9 years and talking about moving on to another job, but I guess I'm just not ready. I'm not ready to stop working.
Now, when it comes to the sheriff's department, one of the questions that I got by an email this morning, actually, and I couldn't answer it, was why doesn't the sheriff patrol through the city of Toledo? Because we did talk about in some counties, that's what the sheriff's duties are. Why doesn't the sheriff patrol or offer patrols of its own through the city of Toledo and through other municipalities inside the county?
Well, there was a time when the sheriff did have some patrol duties inside the city of Toledo.
Mm-hmm.
They took care of all the LMHA housing developments when I was the chief in Toledo.
Okay.
I know that Sheriff THARP started a downtown joint patrol with a city of Toledo police officer in the same vehicle.
Yep.
I'm not sure if patrol still exists today, but I know
it does. Yeah. Yeah.
But generally, there's a division between incorporated areas and unincorporated areas. And the same reason that the sheriff doesn't patrol inside the city of Sylvania or the city of Maumee or the city or township of Sylvania, it comes down to tax dollars and how do you best spend those tax dollars wisely. And if the city of Toledo and Sylvania Township is paying to have their police department, then perhaps Lucas County should spend those dollars patrolling the areas that don't have a police department.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the question arises because they see, at least in the city of Toledo, we're getting more shootings on a regular basis, stabbings on a regular basis. And I think they believe that more patrols, if we don't have enough of our own officers, would at least maybe lessen that crime a little bit, give a police presence on streets that maybe don't have it because our force is so much smaller. Is that something that you would consider looking at with the chief of police of Toledo?
Well, Toledo's got a great chief, and I have a great working relationship with him. And if I'm successful being elected, I would certainly sit down with him and figure out how I could help. And the problems that Toledo is facing right now is happening everywhere in the country, every urban area in the country. It's not unique to the city of Toledo. And I'm confident that things will get better.
All right. As a sheriff, have you looked at the department at all and other changes that you might like to make in the Lucas County Sheriff's Department?
Well, I've done a lot of research. I've read a lot of reports. I've looked at the organizational chart. I've looked at the annual budget. It really comes down to fixing things that are broken. I don't want to fix things that are not broken. And I really don't know what's broken and what's not broken until I get in there. And that would be my first priority, is to spend a lot of time going throughout the building, throughout the organization, talking to people and getting input and finding out what we can do better and what needs to stay the same. Because the last thing you want to do is go in there and start making changes just for the sake of changing.
Yeah.
I came to Oregon. I was led to believe that this police department was broken, needed a lot of changes, and it's not the case. This was a great police department when I came out here, which made my job so much easier and so much more enjoyable. So I'm not going to go in and start to fix things that are not broken.
Now, you do have some budget experience, obviously, because you were chief in Toledo, you're chief in Oregon now. And as a sheriff, you'd have the budget responsibilities for the sheriff's department. It would be a little bit different because the funding sources are different. As the chief of the Toledo department and of Oregon, did you have much control over how much you got in your budget, or was that left to the politicians and you just had to work with whatever they gave you?
Well, Toledo and Oregon are completely different.
Okay.
Toledo struggled financially most of the time that I was there as chief. In a lot of years, it really wasn't a matter of things that I was going to acquire, it was how much I was going to give up annually. We had some very difficult years, and it all comes down to tax base. Now, Oregon, for the first 8.5 years that I was here, was doing great financially. We have 2 hospitals and 2 refineries. As long as I was reasonable, I went into budget hearings making requests and pretty much was granted those requests by our administrator, mayor, and city council. And we made a lot of improvements. We built a tremendous fitness center, a training facility with a building and an outdoor range. We have the best equipment, I think, of any police department around, because I had that support of the elected leaders.
Yeah.
But COVID-19 has really affected Oregon, so things have changed. We've been through a hiring freeze, and it's going to be a tough couple of years because of what has happened to the refineries. The refineries are a big part of our tax base in Oregon, and they're taking a big hit because people aren't flying, they're not driving, they're not buying gasoline, and the price has gone down, and it's affected their profit. So that has an impact on Oregon, but Oregon will come out of this. I mean, they're still going to be strong, but comparing Oregon to Toledo for the past 9 years, there's just no way you can compare them because of the economic situation.
Yeah. One of the other things that comes up, and it probably could come up with a lot of law enforcement officers who have moved jobs, and I'm sure you've heard this one before, is the whole double dipping argument. And I think that people don't understand sometimes that you've paid into your pension when you were a city of Toledo police officer. You're paying into your pension as an Oregon police officer. You're a public servant. I don't have a problem with it because I understand that it's the legislature that set the rules. How do you respond to people who complain about what they refer to as double dipping and why you would want another job as a public servant.
Well, my definition of double dipping is when you remain in the same job and you collect a pension and a salary. I do not support that. I think that's wrong. I think it looks bad, creates a very negative perception. But anybody that retires from a job and is not really ready to quit working and to stay home, that chooses to go out and get another job, I have no problem with that whatsoever, whether that job is in the same field or maybe something completely different. But I don't, people that want to continue to work, I have no problem with that. But if you want to take a pension from that job, it's time to leave that job.
Yeah.
And I don't like taking a pension and a salary for that same job. I would not support that.
Yeah, and we've had some people that have done that in this area before, and that's not what you're doing. You were actually retired
Yes.
as chief of Toledo Police, and it was a little bit of time before you became chief of the Oregon department, right?
Correct. I had a job lined up in the private sector. It was already to start. And then I called from Oregon, and Oregon sounded attractive to me. And I decided to take advantage of that opportunity. And here I am 9 years later.
Yeah. So what's your, they call it an elevator pitch. What's your elevator pitch to voters? You get on the bottom floor and you're headed up to the penthouse there. What's your elevator pitch to voters as to why they should choose you as Lucas County Sheriff?
Well, I think Lucas County voters are very fortunate to have three very competent individuals running for sheriff. So whoever comes out of this election, I think will serve the citizens of Lucas County quite well. Myself, I think I have the most experience. I have 22 years as a chief of police, and I think these are difficult times right now, and I think that that experience is going to help me hit the ground running and take on these monumental challenges that the new sheriff is going to have to face.
Chief, I appreciate the time this morning. Good luck in the race. Chief Navarre will be on the ballot November the 3rd. You're an endorsed Democrat, right, on the ballot this year? How important is that? I want to get that last question. How important is it to have the endorsement of a party in the backing? Because the sheriff's office really is a law enforcement office, it's not really a political office. So it doesn't really matter one way or the other. But you've always kind of run as a Democrat, haven't you?
I've never run before. This first time.
Well, that's right. Because as a chief, you get appointed. Well, how important was it to get the endorsement then?
I think you really have to choose a path, and I chose a Democratic path, and I think it was important to get that endorsement. But what I tell voters is, when you go to the polls, you look at the people. You pick who you think is the best candidate. You don't pick what letter is next to their name. And that's the way I've always voted my entire life. And that's the way I'll continue to vote. And that's the way it should be. You need to pick the best candidate.
Chief, thanks a lot for the time today. Good luck on November 3rd, and stay safe.
Thank you, Fred.